Help me hit 7,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Thank you. I never thought a simple conversation could unravel so much. My name is Finley, but most people call me Finn, and I've always considered myself a reasonably patient guy. Level-headed, calm, understanding, sometimes to a fault. I met Clara 3 years ago, during a weekend trip with mutual friends. She had this laugh that could light up a room, and I, being a little quieter and reserved, was drawn to the brightness she carried effortlessly. It wasn't long before our friendship turned into something more, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. For a long time, everything felt perfect. Late-night calls, shared playlists, weekend adventures in little towns just a few hours away. But, as the months rolled into years, the subtle cracks began to show. Small things I brushed off, thinking I was overreacting. Clara had this way of making me feel seen one moment and invisible the next. She loved her friends fiercely, and I didn't mind that. I actually admired it. But there was one person in particular, Theo, her ex from college. She insisted they were just friends, harmless conversations, no strings. And at first I believed her. But the doubt had a way of creeping in. Every time she mentioned him, there was this light in her eyes, a tone in her voice that unsettled me. I didn't voice it at first. I tried to trust, tried to remind myself that she had chosen me. I even laughed along when our friends joked about how she always seemed to compare people to Theo. But over time, the casual texts, the late-night chats, the stories she told me about him, it all started to feel like a soft, persistent weight pressing against my chest. So one evening, sitting on her small couch with a cup of chamomile tea, I decided to bring it up. Carefully, gently, in the calmest voice I could manage, I said, "Clara, I don't want to control your friendships, but can we talk about boundaries with Theo?" My heart was already racing, but I knew I needed honesty, not assumptions. I expected a conversation, maybe some negotiation, maybe even a little frustration, but nothing prepared me for what came next. She laughed, a light, almost dismissive chuckle, and then said, "Finn, I'm not cutting off my ex just because you're insecure. He's just a friend. I can have people in my life and you don't get to dictate that." I froze for a second. Her words weren't sharp or mean-spirited, but there was a finality to them, a line drawn in the sand. My mind spun. In that instant, I saw two possible paths. One where I reacted defensively, argued, tried to convince her of my feelings, and one where I listened, swallowed my pride, and processed. I chose the latter. I said, softly, "Okay." And just like that, the air shifted. Not violently, not with anger, but with an invisible tension that wrapped itself around the room. I nodded, leaned back, and tried to steady my racing thoughts. Because deep down, I realized that this wasn't about Theo. It wasn't about jealousy or control. It was about respect, about feeling valued, about knowing that someone you trust sees your concerns as valid instead of dismissing them with a laugh. For days afterward, I replayed the moment over and over. Every time I thought about her laugh, her words, the calm way she said it, I felt this strange mix of love and frustration. I didn't want to be the guy who controlled her friendships, but I also didn't want to feel small, insignificant, a second thought to some harmless past connection. And then came the texts. Innocent on the surface, casual mentions of Theo. "He sent me a link to this article, thought you'd like it." Or, "Theo invited me to this gallery opening next week." I wanted to say something, to assert my boundaries gently, but the words caught in my throat. I had said, "Okay," hadn't I? That word had anchored me, restrained me, made me complicit in my own discomfort. At the same time, my friends noticed a change. My roommate, Elliot, pulled me aside one night. "Finn, you've been quieter lately. Something's bothering you. Is this about Clara and Theo?" And I admitted it, slowly, reluctantly. Told him how small moments were piling up, how I felt like I was losing ground in a relationship I loved, and how I couldn't tell if my feelings were reasonable or just insecurities. Elliot, ever the pragmatic friend, didn't give me platitudes. He just said, "If you keep swallowing everything, you'll forget your own voice. Don't let that happen." And that stuck with me. Every interaction with Clara now felt like walking a tightrope. One false step and I'd feel dismissed. One casual mention of Theo and I'd feel diminished. But I kept quiet, kept trying, kept loving her the way I always had. And yet, the more I tried to rationalize it, the heavier the tension became. It was subtle, almost invisible to outsiders. But for me, it was a storm building in slow motion, a quiet erosion of trust and connection. Then, one Friday evening, it all came to a head. We were having dinner at home, pasta and garlic bread, her favorite playlist humming softly in the background. She casually mentioned a plan to meet Theo the next afternoon, just for coffee. I felt the familiar tug of frustration, the uncomfortable knot in my chest. But this time, instead of speaking immediately, I paused. I watched her, saw the excitement in her eyes, the genuine warmth of a friend reconnecting. And then it hit me. This wasn't about controlling her, it wasn't about jealousy. It was about me, my limits, my boundaries, my need to feel valued in the relationship. I took a deep breath and said, carefully, Clara, I need to tell you something. I want us to have clarity on what we can both feel comfortable with. It's not about controlling you. It's about knowing where the line is for us. Clara paused, fork hovering midair, and looked at me with that same bright, unflinching gaze I'd fallen for years ago. I could see her processing my words, weighing them, and maybe even judging me, but I didn't flinch. I had decided that night that my feelings mattered just as much as hers. She smiled softly, but there was a shade of exasperation in it. Finn, I get it, she said. I do, but I'm telling you again, Theo is just a friend. There's nothing there. I don't need to cut anyone out of my life because you feel insecure. I nodded, and in that moment, I realized something crucial. My challenge wasn't about her actions. It was about my response. I had a choice. I could argue, try to bend her boundaries to fit mine, or I could respect her and, simultaneously, decide how far I would go in this relationship before it started eroding my sense of self. I chose the latter. That weekend, we went out for a walk along the riverbank, the city lights reflecting softly on the water. I kept my distance, not in anger, but in quiet contemplation. We didn't talk much about Theo. Instead, we spoke about our day, the little things, the mundane joys that had once defined our connection. And yet, beneath every laugh and gentle conversation, I could feel the unspoken tension. Monday came, and with it, the first major test. Clara received a text from Theo, something trivial, but with that signature familiarity that made my chest tighten. I felt the old surge of anxiety, the uncomfortable twinge of jealousy, but I stopped myself. I remembered my promise to honor my boundaries while preserving my self-respect. I didn't respond. I let it sit, and I let myself breathe. The following week, we had a quiet dinner at her apartment. This time, I brought it up again, not as a demand, not as a fight, but as an honest sharing of my feelings. Clara, I began, I love you and I trust you, but sometimes I feel invisible when it comes to Theo. It's not about controlling you. It's about feeling secure, seen, in our relationship. Her expression softened, and she reached across the table to touch my hand. Finn, I never want you to feel invisible. I don't even realize it sometimes, but I hear you now. And for the first time, I felt a bridge forming, small, fragile, but real. We didn't solve everything that night. Boundaries weren't drawn in stone, and there was still the lingering discomfort of Theo's presence in our lives. But I realized that relationships, real ones, aren't about total control. They're about negotiation, compromise, and mutual understanding. I had learned that saying, okay, initially wasn't surrender. It was a pause, a chance to reflect before reacting. Over the next month, our connection slowly improved. Clara made an effort to check in about our feelings when mentioning Theo. I made an effort to focus on the trust we had built over 3 years, rather than letting doubt consume me. And in those moments of compromise, something beautiful happened. I felt my love for her deepen, not despite the challenges, but because of them. There were still nights when I lay awake, replaying conversations, questioning my feelings, wondering if my insecurities were too much. But I began to recognize that insecurities are human. They are signals, not verdicts. They tell you where your heart and your boundaries need protection. And when expressed with honesty and vulnerability, they don't weaken love, they refine it. Then came the pivotal moment that cemented my understanding. One evening, Clara invited me to meet Theo briefly at a small cafe. I agreed, with nerves knotted in my stomach. When I met him, I observed, not with suspicion, but with clarity. Theo was friendly, polite, utterly harmless. There was no flirtation, no lingering attachment, no threat. And in that moment, I realized the paradox. My jealousy had been my own creation, magnified by fear, not reality. Clara's reassurance, paired with my decision to respect both our boundaries, had dissolved the tension almost entirely. By the end of that evening, walking back to her apartment, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in weeks. I reached for her hand, and she smiled, intertwining our fingers naturally. No dramatic declarations, no fiery confrontations. Just a quiet, steady affirmation that we could navigate the complexities of love and friendship together. I won't lie, it wasn't perfect. There were missteps, moments of doubt, and uncomfortable conversations still to come. But what I discovered, what I hold on to now, is this: love isn't about erasing the world around your partner. It's about carving out a safe, mutual space where both people feel respected, heard, and valued. Sometimes that space is hard to define. Sometimes it's messy, but it's worth every moment of self-reflection, patience, and honest dialogue. As I sit here now, reflecting on that period, I realize that the real victory wasn't Clara conceding to my boundaries. It was me learning to stand firm in my feelings without demanding, without controlling, without letting fear dictate my actions. That balance of love, trust, and self-respect is rare, delicate, and profoundly empowering. And maybe, just maybe, that's the lesson every relationship quietly teaches. Boundaries aren't walls. They are bridges. Bridges built from honesty, patience, and courage. Bridges that, if nurtured, can carry two people safely through uncertainty, fear, and the echoes of the past. And for the first time in a long while, I feel like we are walking on that bridge together.